I am a rural fellow named Bill Carlson. Holding an associate degree in animal husbandry, my lifelong ambition has been to possess my own feed store and raise a family. Upon completing junior college, I wedded my high school sweetheart Janice, with whom I grew up and envisioned a future. She was the only girl I ever saw myself living with, a lovely brunette with a pleasing physique that endured despite bearing 2 boys. I took immense pride in her as my wife and was prepared to do anything for her. However, Janice had one issue. She envied those who lived luxuriously. She avidly read society pages and subscribed to magazines featuring glamorous individuals. Even at the dentist's office, she pored over automobile magazines, becoming well-versed in fancy cars and designer clothing lines. She aspired for more, a desire I couldn't fulfill. I secured employment at an upscale feed store in Omaha, catering to the yuppie clientele, allowing us to be nearer to the urban center while pursuing my passion. I enjoyed my work and excelled at it, providing customers with personalized service, which the company acknowledged by granting me flexible hours. Janice initially relished city life over rural living and seemed content. However, when she chose to enter the workforce, we had to resort to daycare for the kids, who didn't seem to mind. Janice landed a position at Gilbert Medical, a medical equipment firm, which she seemed to enjoy as it provided her with the opportunity to dress up and interact with non-farmers. As her career blossomed, her interest in our home life waned, leaving me to handle the majority of childcare duties, from daycare drop-offs to meal preparation and housekeeping, while she focused on laundry, ensuring her clothing remained impeccably ironed. We diligently set aside money each month with the goal of eventually purchasing my own feed store. However, despite both of us working, our savings dwindled. Daycare expenses accounted for some, but the bulk disappeared on beauty treatments, nail salon visits, and expensive clothing purchases. I struggled to comprehend how our dual incomes resulted in diminished savings. Janice refused to address the issue, growing defensive and upset whenever I broached it, so I ceased mentioning it altogether. Nonetheless, I discreetly opened another savings account to keep separate. Meanwhile, Janice began working overtime, engaging in private phone calls, becoming less attentive in our bed life, and expressing desires for a newer, fancier car, and even contemplating chest implants. It left me with no doubt that she was having an affair. Though I'm just a simple guy from the countryside, I'm not naive. Right now, I wasn't interested in salvaging the marriage. I simply wanted to sort things out and move forward before it was too late. Since I didn't socialize with her coworkers, it was tough to pinpoint anything, but I suspected if there was anything going on, it was at her workplace. I had a couple of good buddies at work, not highly educated, but hard workers. Even though I was their boss, I didn't pull rank. The tasks got done without needing to micromanage. We all understood our roles and collaborated well, which fostered a positive relationship. Roy and Freddie would be important allies in my scheme. I noticed that on Wednesdays, Janice would dress up in fancy clothes and linger longer before heading to work. I thought this would be an opportune time to investigate. I briefed the guys on the situation, and they covered for me with my duties. That day, I parked near the entrance of the Gilbert Medical Plant lot, using the time to catch up on technical reading. Around 11 a.m., Janice left and drove to the Holiday Inn lot, parking far from her office. Shortly after, a guy arrived in a red Corvette and parked at the opposite end. Though I didn't recognize him, when he stepped out, Janice followed suit, and they entered a first-floor room, number 117, using his key. My heart sank, and I felt queasy. My suspicions were confirmed. Unsure of my next move, I decided to head back to work, taking my time to plan. Before leaving, I snipped 2 of Janice's valve stems with my wire cutters out of frustration. I'm not sure why I didn't target his. The rest of the day dragged on, and I went through the motions of picking up the kids, preparing dinner, and asking Janice about her day, to which she mentioned a flat tire. One of my coworkers changed it for her, and the incident was never discussed again. The following morning, after dropping the boys off at daycare, I swung by the plant. It didn't take long to spot the red Corvette, which conveniently had a reserved parking spot with a sign. I noted the name, Ken Beecham, distribution manager, whose wife also worked at Gilbert. By that afternoon, I had gathered plenty of information about Ken, including his marital status, past issues at work, and personal details. Although I had his contact info and even his SSN, I wasn't sure how to proceed. He'd been married to Amy for 8 years. We completed a productive day's work, and Roy, Freddie, and I managed to squeeze in 1 beer before I had to pick up the kids. Though uncertain about my next move, I had a feeling things would fall into place soon. Despite trying to maintain a calm and logical approach, my frustration grew daily, and occasional silent tears betrayed my inner turmoil. Feeling wounded and unable to mend myself, living with Janice became increasingly unbearable. I longed for it to be over. The following day, luck smiled on me again when I recalled that Marge Gilbert, one of my loyal customers, was married to the president of the Gilbert Medical Company. Though I hadn't met him, Marge and I had a great rapport. I made a conscious effort to be extra friendly with Marge, exploring if our connection could be advantageous. During Marge's visit with her daughter, Cindy, a vet school student, we conversed for about an hour. Enjoying our interaction, I felt a twinge of guilt after she left, but it quickly passed. Over the weekend, I spent time in the garage welding. I fashioned a small piece of flat steel with 4 sharp concrete nail points attached, my initial step toward seeking revenge through annoyance. On Tuesday, while unloading an order, I appeared more subdued than usual, catching Marge's attention. She noticed my demeanor and asked what was wrong that day, expressing concern. I responded, explaining that I was dealing with some personal issues, apologizing for not being my usual self. Sensing my distress, Marge suggested we have coffee and a chat. As we sat in her kitchen, reminiscent of a magazine spread with its stainless steel and granite decor, I couldn't help but think of how Janice would admire it. Marge placed the coffee on the table and leaned in, asking how she could help me. Reluctant to burden her with my problems, I eventually opened up, realizing it might offer some relief. I confessed that I believed my wife, Janice, was being coerced into a lovemaking relationship with one of her superiors at Gilbert Medical, though I lacked evidence. Marge inquired about the basis of my suspicion, prompting me to explain the small signs I had noticed, including finding them both together at the Holiday Inn the previous week. I admitted that Janice was unaware of my knowledge and that I was unsure how to approach the topic, expressing concern about whether she felt obligated or if it was her choice. I also shared that our family life had deteriorated, with Janice seeming indifferent toward the children and me, and that she was keeping it hidden, which bothered me. Marge asked about the individual involved, and I mentioned that I suspected his name was Ken Beecham, but was unsure of Janice's relationship with him or if they worked in different parts of the plant. I confessed that I had never met him. Marge offered to investigate discreetly, and after a moment of contemplation, I agreed, expressing a preference to avoid causing a scene. She assured me she would look into it and mentioned seeing me next Thursday for the oat delivery. I thanked her, and as I prepared to leave, suggested bringing the boys over so Cindy could meet them. Reflecting on the conversation, I felt the outcome exceeded my expectations. I was confident Janice wouldn't object to me taking the boys out, envisioning a good weekend ahead. The next morning, as rain poured, Janice carefully dressed for her day. I observed silently as I dropped the kids off at daycare before stopping by work, where the guys were ready to cover my morning shifts. Roy would use my truck for deliveries and log entries, which I would review later. Freddie brought his cousin's van, and we loaded a floor jack equipped with my steel plate. After ensuring all trucks were loaded, I departed for the Holiday Inn right on time. Janice parked in her usual spot, followed by Ken. Once they entered the room, I waited for about 10 minutes. In the pouring rain, I retrieved the jack from the van and approached Ken's car. I positioned the jack under his engine block, swiftly lifting it and puncturing the oil pan with nails. Moving to the Corvette, I repeated the process on its fuel tank. Oil and gas spilled out as I returned the jack to the van. The entire operation took less than a minute. I then disabled Janice's car once more before driving away. In my rearview mirror, I witnessed the explosion from Ken's car. As I left the lot, a sense of relief washed over me. Janice arrived home from work a bit late. Without eating supper, she headed straight to bed. I spent some time with the boys, giving them a bath and tucking them in. That night, I slept on the couch. The following morning, Janice remained in bed while I got the boys ready for daycare. We had breakfast and left, but she stayed in bed without a word, and her car was absent from the driveway. Around 9 a.m., after loading all the trucks, Lieutenant John Fritz paid me a visit. He was amiable. He inquired about my work schedule from the previous day, to which I explained it consisted of routine deliveries. I then asked if he needed verification of my whereabouts. Mentioning he obtained the delivery logs from the previous day around noon, I showed him the logs detailing each stop. He smiled and chuckled lightly, commenting on the meticulous log and asking if I maintained it daily. I offered to show logs from the past month, but he declined with a shake of his head, still smiling. Despite his demeanor, I couldn't discern whether it was positive or negative. I inquired about the reason for his visit, and after some hesitation, he explained they were investigating a car damaged at the Holiday Inn. I questioned why he involved me, and he explained my wife's car, parked nearby, had 2 valve stems cut, leading them to wonder if it was related to the incident. Expressing unawareness of why my wife's car was at the Holiday Inn, I asked about her connection to the damaged car, which he clarified belonged to a colleague she had a lunch meeting with at the hotel. When I asked if he spoke with the people they dined with, he admitted they couldn't recall their names. Pressing for a straightforward conversation, he leaned back, smiling, and mentioned someone named Ken Beecham. I affirmed that I had never met him. He seemed to believe me, expressing a preference not to get involved in domestic matters. Offering his card, he suggested I contact him if needed, and apologized for bringing the issue to my attention. As he left, I muttered about the lack of substantial information provided and the need to connect the dots. After work, upon returning home with the kids, Janice's car was in the driveway. She was casually dressed and had prepared supper, claiming she felt unwell and had called in sick. She didn't mention the previous day's events, so I didn't broach the subject. She retired early, and once again, I took care of the boys and slept on the couch. The following day, she was up and preparing for work when I left with the boys for daycare. After dropping them off, I visited the doctor's office and requested an STD check. Work proceeded as usual for a Friday. Upon returning home, Janice was there once again. After dinner, I informed her that I planned to take the boys to spend the next day at one of my customers' farms. I offered her the chance to join us, fully aware she'd find an excuse to decline. She mentioned some shopping she wanted to do, and I didn't press further. Whether it was shopping or a date, the outcome remained the same. Saturday at Gilbert's Ranch with Cindy and the boys was fantastic. We enjoyed the entire day together, with Marge preparing a wonderful lunch for everyone. I wished the day wouldn't end. Cindy bonded well with the boys, and they seemed to adore her. Unfortunately, Mr. Gilbert wasn't present, so I still didn't get to meet him. Marge didn't bring up our previous conversation, and it seemed Cindy was oblivious to it. Reluctantly, we had to head home. Janice showed no interest in our day when we returned. The boys attempted to share their adventures with her, but she disregarded them. Eventually, they gave up. She did inquire why I wasn't sleeping in the bed anymore. I explained that work-related stress caused me to toss and turn, and I didn't want to disturb her sleep. That was the last she mentioned it. The following week proceeded without incident. I noticed on her special day that she made no special preparations, leading me to assume the rendezvous for the day was canceled. This suited me fine, as I had plenty of work to catch up on. I visited a divorce lawyer I had heard about, receiving informational handouts and brochures, including fill-in-the-blank forms that caught my interest. Everything returned to normal until the following Wednesday. She began the day with a morning shower, carefully styling her hair. She wore new black lingerie, a new perfume, and what seemed to be new shoes. I made sure she didn't catch me observing, and I hurried out with the boys. I was certain this was a date. After dropping off the boys, I swung by the plant and checked his parking spot. A new Porsche Boxster occupied his slot. I noted down the license number and hastened back to work. The guys shared my excitement about the new development. We rushed through the morning deliveries and manipulated the logs once more. I'm sure John Fritz could see through our charade, but we proceeded nonetheless. We enjoyed an extended lunch break. While Roy continued with the deliveries, Freddie picked up 2 large bottles of hydrochloric acid from the swimming pool supply store. I intended to spend lunch with John Fritz. He gave me a peculiar look when I entered his office with pulled pork sandwiches, fries, and a couple of Cokes. I greeted him and sat down across from him. He sensed something was amiss and grinned broadly. I suggested we grab lunch together and catch up on the car damage case, hoping to keep him occupied for about 2 hours. It was going to be a lengthy lunch. While I kept up a friendly demeanor, Freddie was at the Holiday Inn parking lot. He located the Boxer and meticulously poured acid over the trunk, fenders, and deck. He sliced the convertible top and poured acid over the leather seats and floor mats. The dashboard received its share of acid as well. As an extra measure, he deposited a box of mothballs in the gas tank. The nap, however, would wreak havoc on the engine if anyone attempted to start it. The remaining acid was spread across the top of the tires. Before leaving, he once again snipped the valve stems on Janice's car. It all transpired within 15 minutes. The only downside was not knowing how long they would be in the room. John and I engaged in light conversation for a while, until he asked what I was up to. I casually mentioned ensuring I had a solid alibi in case something happened to Ken Beecham's car that day. When John asked why that day was special, I joked about the pulled pork sandwiches being on special. After that, I called the daycare center and asked Carol to arrange for Janice to pick up the boys, explaining that I would be busy at work that afternoon. John chuckled about the delicious pork sandwiches. After a pause, John asked if he should call Mr. Beecham and inquire about his car. I questioned why he would want to do that and provided him with Mr. Beecham's cell number and the number of the Holiday Inn room 117. John put the phone on speaker and dialed the hotel number. After a few rings, Ken Beecham answered, breathing heavily. Detective Fritz informed him that they still had no leads on who damaged his car and inquired about his new car's whereabouts. Ken seemed surprised by the call and questioned how Detective Fritz got his number. After a brief exchange, Ken mentioned his new car was in the parking lot, and Detective Fritz heard strange noises in the background. Ken abruptly ended the call, stating he needed to get dressed and check something. John grinned at me, asking if I was satisfied. After our conversation, I returned to work. Roy had the logs in perfect condition, and Freddie had discreetly disposed of the acid bottles. That evening at home, Janice picked up the boys but remained silent, going to bed early once more. The following day, John visited me and detailed all the damage to the car, explaining that Ken's insurance was pending since the Corvette incident. The car was totaled, leaving him over $60,000 in debt. Ken insisted I was involved, despite John confirming I was with him at the time. While John naturally suspected my involvement, he couldn't prove anything, nor did he seem inclined to. As for how Janice got her tires fixed, I never inquired, and no one offered any information. Since Janice hadn't come clean about the situation, I decided it was time to put an end to it all. My STD test results came back negative. I had filled out the paperwork for the lawyer to initiate the divorce proceedings. I planned to visit the Gilberts' ranch with the boys this weekend, just in case Cindy was there. If not, we'd spend the day with Marge. The only loose end was lacking evidence of the extramarital affair. The weekend was pleasant. Cindy was present, much to the kids' delight, and we all enjoyed ourselves once more. We felt like a family again, and I missed that, as did the boys. Cindy remained unaware of the situation, but at least she didn't inquire. Before I departed, Marge reassured me with a wink, saying everything would be all right. I was offered a new position about 100 miles away, offering more pay, a better job, and the option to buy into the business in a few years. It seemed perfect, except for the fact that we wouldn't be near Cindy. The following Wednesday, Janice dressed up again. I wasn't sure what kind of car her boyfriend used, but she was clearly preparing for another rendezvous with him. I assumed they were still meeting at the same place. I knew I had to take action, but I hadn't formulated a plan yet. The guys and I were brainstorming when Marge Gilbert pulled up. She signaled for me to approach and silently drove us to the plant. Parking in the back, we entered through a private entrance straight to Mr. Gilbert's office. Marge facilitated introductions, and his secretary brought us coffee. We engaged in small talk for a while, until I finally asked, "Did you bring me here for a reason?" Mr. Gilbert chuckled and mentioned it was time to resolve the situation. He informed me that Marge had briefed him on what was happening, and they had conducted an internal investigation. He assured me that by the end of the day, I would have all the necessary information. He apologized in advance if anything he did caused me damage. We engaged in more conversation, and Marge noticed my grin when Cindy was mentioned. I attempted to conceal it, but did a poor job. Suddenly, the phone rang, catching everyone's attention. Mr. Gilbert received an update and confirmed that everything was set. He explained that Ken and my wife were in their usual room at the Holiday Inn. Ken had driven a company vehicle there, which violated policy, so it was being brought back to the plant. Unfortunately, my wife's car had a couple of flat tires, which seemed to be a recurring occurrence. He then put the phone on speaker and dialed the room. Mr. Gilbert called Ken and informed him of the urgent need to discuss something. Ken seemed surprised and asked what the matter was and how Mr. Gilbert got his number. Mr. Gilbert brushed off the question and explained that the legal department had been alerted to a potential lovemaking annoyance situation. He asked if there was a female employee from their company with Ken. After a moment of silence and indistinct background chatter, Ken confirmed that she was there. Mr. Gilbert asked if she was there willingly or if she was being coerced or threatened. Ken assured him that she was there of her own accord and that the relationship was consensual. Mr. Gilbert expressed appreciation for Ken's honesty on the sensitive issue and stated that they would prepare a statement to confirm the consensual nature of the relationship. He then requested to speak with the young lady. After some background noise, Janice came on the line and asked how she could assist him. Mr. Gilbert asked if Ken coerced or threatened her to accompany him there. Janice confirmed to Mr. Gilbert that Ken hadn't threatened her, and the relationship was consensual. Mr. Gilbert expressed relief and informed them that when they returned to the plant, the statements would be ready for them to sign. He asked to speak with Ken again. Upon Ken's return to the phone, Mr. Gilbert instructed him to come back to the plant for signing papers in the legal department. After hanging up, Mr. Gilbert suggested to Marge that she take me out for lunch and return in a couple of hours once the legal team had finished their work. We enjoyed a fantastic lunch, and although I wanted to express my gratitude, I refrained from doing so. Eventually, Marge convinced me not to discuss the matter or what was done ever again. She also made me promise not to mention anything to Cindy. That was a positive sign. I informed Marge about my new job offer, and she was happy for me and the boys. After lunch, we went back to the plant, where I obtained notarized copies of Ken and Janice's statements. Both confirmed they had engaged in consensual closeness outside their marriage. The legal team assured me this would be sufficient for my lawyer to proceed with the divorce. Ken and Janice were terminated from their positions. Their belongings were packed before their arrival, and they were escorted out of the building. Unfortunately, neither of them had a car. Marge provided me with her card to use temporarily, and I promised to return it the following day. I dropped off the documents at the lawyer's office. She made multiple copies of each, which I intended to send to Ken's wife. I closed our bank accounts, paid off and canceled all credit cards, and arranged for the utilities to be disconnected. On Friday afternoon, I visited John Fritz and assured him I had behaved. He chuckled and mentioned that he had informed the landlord about not renewing the lease next month. Additionally, he had given notice at work, noting that they were supportive but disappointed about his departure. Freddie accompanied me to the Gilbert Ranch with my truck so I could return Marge's car. It was time to pick up the boys and head home. I dreaded walking through the door. Janice's car wasn't in the driveway. When we entered, she was sitting on the couch crying. This was the first time she had shown any emotion at all. 2 file boxes containing her personal belongings from work were nearby. I fed the boys and put on the TV for them. I stood by her, giving her an opportunity to speak if she wanted. She expressed her frustration, stating that I had to interfere and ruin everything in her life. She questioned why I couldn't mind my own business and accused me of not having the right to interfere with hers. I was astonished that she still viewed the situation as solely concerning her, showing no concern for the children or me, nor considering Ken's wife, Amy. Our family, our life, and our plans meant nothing to her. Her only focus was her own actions at that moment. I felt relieved that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life with her. Without a word, I went upstairs and took a shower. Later, while getting the boys ready for bed, she retreated to the bedroom and shut the door. The next day, I took the boys with me to work, ensuring there were no loose ends and that Roy and Freddie could manage the system I'd established. We gathered boxes from stores for the move. Passing by the Holiday Inn, I noticed Janice's car was gone, presumably repaired by now. Fixing the flat tires likely took a toll on her shopping budget for the past month. Janice wasn't home when we returned. We only took clothes and toys, leaving everything else for her to dispose of. She didn't know that by the next day, all the utilities would be shut off. Damn, I was ruthless. As we backed out of the driveway, Janice pulled in. She stood by her car, watching us drive away. I took the boys to Chuck E. Cheese and stayed at a motel overnight. The next morning, I dropped them off at daycare. I gave Carol cookies and party favors, explaining it was their last day, and I wanted them to enjoy it with their friends. Before leaving, she pulled me aside and asked about my wife's behavior the previous week. She explained that she didn't want to pry, but since I was leaving, she was curious. She mentioned that my wife seemed furious when she called, demanding to know where she got the number. When she mentioned that I gave it to her, my wife started cursing. Although my wife didn't say anything when she picked up the children, she could tell she was really angry. She apologized for involving Carol, admitting she set her up. She revealed that Janice was having an affair and was at the Holiday Inn with her boyfriend. She hoped that by Carol calling and interrupting their party, Janice would reconsider, but it didn't work, and Janice got mad at both of them. She mentioned that she would be serving Janice with divorce papers that afternoon and would be leaving with the boys for a new job right after picking them up. She acknowledged it was a low blow on her part and apologized for involving Carol. Later, I went to see my divorce lawyer, who had everything ready. I would have custody of the kids, and Janice could have visitation rights whenever she wanted. This arrangement was fine with me, as I didn't think she would be interested in them anyhow. Everything else was split 50-50, but there wasn't much to divide. There was no alimony, child support, or cash settlements. I left her all the furniture, appliances, and household items. I really didn't want them. She kept her car, which I didn't want because it kept getting flat tires. All I had to do was give the papers to Janice. Unless she contested it, everything would be final in 3 months. A copy of Ken and Janice's notarized statement was attached to the divorce paperwork. The lawyer's note indicated that the statements would remain private if all terms were agreed upon. There were no questions. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. I sat there for a while. I had loved Janice. She was the only girl I was ever close to. I assumed our relationship was normal and didn't realize I wasn't meeting her needs. She never directly communicated, and I was too oblivious to pick up the clues. I had failed her in many ways. While her actions were deceitful, I felt some of it was due to my inattention. It felt strange knocking on my own door. She opened it, looking tired. She asked if I wanted a drink. I handed her the papers. Without opening them, she looked at them, and then back at me. I asked, "Why?" I couldn't tell if she was angry or sad. After a pause, she expressed her thoughts, highlighting the disparities between them. She pointed out the contrast in scents, noting his aftershave compared to your fertilizer-like odor. The distinction extended to their clothing choices, with him favoring Armani suits while you preferred jeans. Their dining preferences also diverged, as he indulged in lobster while you savored ribs. The dissimilarities continued with his London fog coat juxtaposed against your Carhartt attire, and his fancy car opposed to your truck. She remarked on the state of their nails, with his being manicured and yours consistently dirty. Additionally, she emphasized the difference in their professional statuses, with him having a real job while you were perceived as just a farm boy. She conveyed regret for their marriage, confessing that her initial reasons were misguided, seeking an escape from her parents through the relationship with Bill without considering the long-term consequences. Despite this apology, her sentiments remained unaltered. She professed love for her children, but simultaneously expressed regret for having them, admitting a lack of maternal instinct. The pursuit of someone to fulfill her dreams, she realized, did not bring the satisfaction she anticipated, but left her feeling more dissatisfied with her current circumstances. She acknowledged misleading Bill and acknowledged being an inadequate mother to their children. However, she did not regret the pursuit of her dreams and the quest for something better. In response to my inquiries about his wife, her demeanor swiftly changed. Instead of remorse, she exhibited anger and a refusal to feel sorry for her actions. She communicated a strong desire to follow the life she had always imagined, a husband with a farm boy background, and 2 children with unkempt appearances. She asserted her independence, stating that she didn't need assistance and already had the necessary documents. She concluded by urging me to leave so she could proceed with her chosen path in life. Well, that simplified things. I turned and walked out. When I picked up the boys, Carol said to let her know if I needed more phone calls. I called the utility companies and told them not to disconnect until the end of the month. I felt a little sorry for her. The divorce was final in 3 months. I never heard from Janice. The lawyer said everything went smoothly. My new job was great. However, I missed out on the opportunity to buy the business. Someone else got it, along with prime land. They planned to turn it into a horse breeding farm. My job was secure, but my chance at owning my own place took a setback. 2 weeks later, construction started next to the feed store. We speculated about what was being built until one of the guys asked the site engineer. It was a vet clinic for large animals. They completed the building in less than 60 days. The new owner was due to show up Saturday. On the way to lunch, the boys suddenly yelled, "Cindy! Cindy!" There she was, looking better than ever, with Marge. Cindy had become a veterinarian and wanted to raise show horses while running a large animal clinic. She was building a house nearby. We all went to lunch together, and Cindy shared her plans. The boys and I were beaming all the way home that night. 5 years later, Cindy had a successful clinic and horse breeding venture. I owned 6 feed stores. The boys had 2 baby sisters they adored. My mother-in-law, Marge, and Mr. Gilbert visited every weekend. I never learned his first name, and Janice never visited the boys. Second story. I'm at a loss for where to begin. It's devastating to realize my wife no longer wants to live with me. What's worse is her refusal to provide a reason. She's resistant to moving in with me, and my mother supports her in this decision. Allow me to provide some context. I'm a 51-year-old man who had to leave my hometown 13 years ago for work, leaving my wife, Mona, who is 48, and our 2 children in Texas. They are now 23 and 21, residing independently in Houston. Around 14 years ago, during the U.S. recession caused by the housing bubble, our business collapsed overnight. With my father's passing and me running his construction business, everything fell apart. Balancing the care of my mother, 2 school-age kids, and my wife became overwhelming in such an unstable economy. After depleting all our savings, I had no choice but to make the tough decision to move out. After exploring opportunities in various Asian countries, I eventually established my business in Dubai. Though challenging, the drive to provide for my family kept me going. After leaving Texas, it took me over a year before I could return home to establish my new venture. Since then, I visited home every 5 to 6 months. I desired to bring my family with me, but Mona and the kids were reluctant due to concerns about disrupting their schooling. Last year, when my youngest daughter finished college and secured a job, I planned to visit home to spend time with her. During that visit, I suggested to Mona that we relocate here now that the children have moved out, but she declined, fearing leaving my mother alone. I proposed bringing my mother along, but they both opposed the idea of leaving their hometown, citing the vast cultural differences in the Middle East. They had valid concerns, so I didn't press further. During my last visit home, I shared with Mona my intention to wrap up things in Dubai and return to Texas. I anticipated her excitement, but instead, she reacted unhappily. I inquired why she didn't want us to live together, and she explained she was content but puzzled why I'd leave everything behind. While she had a point about the sacrifices made to establish myself in Dubai, after 13 years away and with our children grown, I longed to return to my comfort zone. I reassured her about our finances and plans to establish something in Texas given the improved economy. However, she remained unconvinced, which raised concerns for me, though I gave her the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, my mother dropped by unexpectedly and advised against my quick decision to return. Since I hadn't shared my plans with her or anyone else, it must have been Mona who informed her. I was taken aback. Similar to Mona, my mom's concern made me doubt myself. I began to wonder if I was making a mistake and ultimately abandoned the idea. However, I couldn't shake off the distress caused by my wife's reluctance to live with me. While her reasoning might make sense, I felt devastated by Mona's emotional distance. This feeling consumed me so much that upon returning home, I reduced my calls and texts with her. I hoped she would notice and inquire, but she seemed indifferent to whether everything was okay. There were days when I didn't reach out, and she didn't either. Over time, her communication became purely transactional, indicating that she no longer relied on me. So last month, I confronted her, questioning if she still loved me. She dismissed it as overthinking, explaining that she was busy caring for the household and my aging mother. I was at a loss for words. It's uncommon for a wife to bond so well with her mother-in-law and care for them. While I appreciated Mona's kindness to my mom, my unease grew daily. I couldn't comprehend why she didn't want me home when we already had our own house. Our major responsibilities were fulfilled, and I reassured her that our lifestyle wouldn't suffer. It just didn't make sense. Yes, I considered the same possibility as you all might be thinking. Perhaps she found someone else, but how could I uncover the truth? She hadn't shown any other signs until now. She had been a fantastic mother, bravely raising our children during my absence. It wasn't easy. She fulfilled all her roles gracefully. Sometimes I feel guilty for suspecting her, but you know how challenging long-distance relationships can be. Update. Mona had been having an affair, and my mother had known all along but never told me. I can't understand why I deserved this fate. I arranged a surprise trip home without informing anyone, not even my mom. As I entered my house, I dreaded encountering Mona with her lover. It's somewhat ironic, given the stories I've heard about cheating spouses of deployed spouses. Thankfully, that scenario didn't unfold. Mona was in the kitchen when I used the spare key to enter the house. She was visibly shocked to see me. To conceal my surprise visit, I brought a bouquet. Although Mona seemed surprised, she also appeared suspicious of my unexpected arrival and bombarded me with questions. I explained that I had light work that month, prompting me to come home. Mona managed a forced smile, pretending to be pleased, but it was clearly insincere. Over the next few weeks, I painstakingly uncovered the truth. I resorted to tactics I'm not proud of, but I felt I had no choice. I snooped through her phone, listened in on her conversations, planted a GPS tracker in her car, and trailed her around town. This investigation yielded information bit by bit, painting a clear picture of what was happening in my absence. It transpired that she had been seeing someone for the past 8 years. Upon my return home, Mona was unusually guarded about her phone, unlike before, when she would clean up all evidence. This time, she didn't have the chance. Although I attempted to snoop through her phone on the first day, I was unsuccessful. When I eventually gained access, I found nothing incriminating. She likely wiped it clean at the first opportunity. The affair came to light when I tracked her movements using a GPS device in her car. Initially, I didn't suspect anything when I observed her entering a hardware store. However, upon waiting for her return, I noticed the owner closing the shop. It left me feeling dizzy. Hours later, I saw Mona leaving the shop, and the owner reopened it once her car had departed. I considered entering the shop to confront her lover, but I hesitated, fearing he might recognize me and ruin my plan. I patiently waited for her next visit, hoping to catch them in the act. She typically ventured out in the afternoon, sometimes visiting my mom with friends or relatives. I followed her everywhere, hoping to catch her with her paramour. Finally, yesterday, she went to visit my mom. Ordinarily, I refrained from following her further on such occasions, which is why it took me so long to catch them. But yesterday, I remained vigilant and witnessed them leaving the house together. It didn't strike me as suspicious at the time. I assumed they were heading for shopping or some other errand. Though I initially resisted the urge to follow them, something compelled me to do so. They stopped at the hardware store, and my heart sank when I saw her lover greet them. Both Mona and my mom exited the car. Her lover kissed Mona in front of my mom, and they conversed briefly. Then, he hugged my mom before she got back in the car and drove off. Mona and her lover entered his shop, and he closed the shutter behind them. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. Betrayal from one's spouse is one thing, but betrayal from one's own mother is unimaginable. The truth overwhelmed me to the point where I had to take a few moments to catch my breath before proceeding to the shop. My knocks went unanswered, so I persisted until her lover finally opened the door. I demanded to know where Mona was, and he froze. I pushed past him and stormed into the shop. Before he had a chance to respond, the lights went out, and I heard a faint voice from the storeroom. Hastily, I rushed in to find my wife lying exposed, pleasuring herself and calling out for someone else. It lasted only a moment before someone else leaped at me and dragged me out as Mona screamed loudly. The scene was so chaotic that it took me a while to grasp what was happening. I struck the intruder and broke free. By then, Mona had emerged, hastily covering herself. I seized her by the arm and demanded to know how long this had been going on, but Mona intervened, pleading for us to discuss it at home. Aware I could face consequences for the altercation, I backed off, exited, and drove away. I headed to my mom's place. Bursting inside, I shouted accusations, convinced she was aware. Mona had already informed her, as my mom's lack of surprise indicated. She simply cried and held my hand, urging me to calm down. I collapsed emotionally. Soon, Mona joined us. Seeing her face only fueled my anger. I implored them both to tell me the truth. After much prodding, Mona confessed to feeling deeply lonely during my absence, for 13 years. I had been so consumed with work that I had little time for her. My calls were brief check-ins about the kids and Mom. But what about me? I demanded to know how long this had been going on. She admitted, perhaps 7 or 8 years. Shocked, I felt like a fool. I had toiled abroad for years to provide for my family, only to find this betrayal waiting for me at home. I questioned why she hadn't sought a divorce if our connection had deteriorated so much. She broke down again, insisting she loved me, and the affair was solely to alleviate her loneliness. He meant nothing to her, she claimed. I couldn't believe it. I turned to my mom, asking how I deserved such betrayal from her. She wept, pleading for understanding, explaining Mona had been caring for her. Once I had all the answers, I rose to leave. They tried to stop me, but I warned them not to. I instructed Mona not to return home, needing time alone. Driving back, I felt nauseous, unsure how to process it all. Was this affair truly my fault for sacrificing so much for my family? Update. I spent the following days deeply immersed in sorrow. Afterwards, I drove to Houston to see my grown daughters. They weren't children anymore. They deserved to know what their mother had been doing while I provided for them. I also did it to protect myself. My intention was to leave the country, fearing Mona might manipulate my daughters against me. They were devastated by the truth. The older one even suspected Mona and my mom were up to something. She also mentioned suspecting my mom of seeing a widower nearby. However, that was not my concern. My dad had passed away years ago, so my mom could do as she pleased. Yet, she supported Mona, causing problems for me. The following day, I packed up and returned home. Mona and Mom had been calling incessantly. Since then, I think they came home to find an empty house, facing reality. Initially, I left them for a month. The calls and texts were filled with apologies, pleading for my return. But eventually, they became concerned about money. I intentionally didn't block them, wanting to see their anxiety. Without funds, I froze my bank accounts and credit card. They panicked, realizing they had no income. Mom's state pension wasn't enough to sustain their lifestyle. They tried everything to reach me, but I ignored them. Mom resorted to emotional manipulation, claiming my late father would be heartbroken. Their pleas fell on deaf ears. I never suspected Mona. I never checked her phone like people in long-distance relationships do, but I always respected her privacy more than Mona. I felt betrayed by my mom sometimes, especially when I sensed something was off with Mona. Witnessing their strong bond made me feel betrayed in return. Their excuse for covering up Mona's affair was weak. Feeling lonely, she chose to cheat? She felt alone despite having family and friends around? Compared to her, I was lonelier, literally alone in a foreign land. I could have done the same, but I didn't. I was focused on my family's well-being, working hard to save and return home. When their attempts to contact me failed, they reached out to my daughter for help. Mona didn't know I had told the truth to the girls, and she did exactly what I expected. She spoke ill of me in front of them, alleging I had cut them off financially or was having an affair. However, my daughters saw through her lies and confronted her, driving her away that day. But Mona continued to reach out to my younger daughter, exploiting her innocence for money. However, I won't intervene. She's an adult who knows what to do. Mom has also reached out to my daughter for financial help. As for me, I'm still unable to move on from the feeling of betrayal. I haven't considered divorce yet. Divorce would be financially and personally beneficial for Mona if she wants to marry someone else. However, I won't pursue it. She's already living in my house, and that's the most she can get from me. Being out of the country with no accountability, whether divorced or not, doesn't matter to me. I'm focused on moving on with my life. Update. After cutting off their financial support, they exhausted all possible resources. While my older daughter refused to assist, the younger one was manipulated into helping. However, her earnings from her low-paying first job barely cover her essentials. Despite this, she's saving some to assist her mother, which made me proud. Eventually, she became overwhelmed and suggested Mona find employment to support herself. But Mona took her assistance for granted, insisting it was her daughter's duty to care for her. Despite doing her best with her limited income, my younger daughter reached her breaking point and ceased providing support. Unable to marry someone new while still married to me, Mona has been pressuring me for a divorce. She's threatened legal action, but I'm unfazed. Being abroad, I doubt she has the resources or knowledge to pursue legal action across borders. Plus, in this country, there are no legal consequences for abandoning a cheating spouse. So, good luck to her with that. Currently, Mona works at her partner's shop, though I'm unsure of her compensation, whether it's money or something else. Her partner doesn't even have a proper home, residing in a camper, and his financial situation seems inadequate to support Mona as far as my mom is concerned. Sometimes, I feel guilty for cutting her off and consider helping her out. However, she receives a pension that should suffice for her needs. She brought this situation upon herself. Perhaps I'll reconcile with her in the future, but not now. Although she's apologized, it didn't feel sincere. I'll wait until she truly regrets her actions and my anger subsides, allowing love to prevail. Some advise me to move on and enjoy the vibrant lifestyle of Dubai, but it's not all as glamorous as portrayed on social media. It requires a substantial amount of money. Moreover, the legal landscape regarding women is stringent here, and I'm not interested in using women to cope with my grief. However, I've been traveling extensively since then, exploring places like China and Bali, with plans to visit more Asian countries and experience their cultures.